Most people who grew up in the 1970s remember exactly where they were the first time they saw the Pink Panther strikes again. The laughs, the chaos, Dreyfus slowly losing his mind again at the first sight of Clouseau. But behind every scene, there are layers most audiences never noticed. Details in the casting, the choreography, the visual gags, and the production itself that change how you see the whole film. Here are 25 small details you missed in The Pink Panther Strikes Again, 1976. Detail 25. Dreyfus's eye twitch was Herbert Lom's own invention. One of the most memorable physical details in the film, Dreyfus's involuntary eye tick, the eye that twitches and rolls with increasing frequency as his madness deepens, was not written into the script or directed by Blake Edwards. It was entirely improvised by Herbert Lom himself. Lom developed the tick as a physical expression of the character's deteriorating mental state, using it to chart Dreyfus's descent scene by scene. He chose when to deploy it, how violently it should spasm, and when to hold it back for maximum effect. It became so integral to the performance that audiences could gauge exactly how close to the edge Dreyfus was at any given moment purely by watching Lom's eye. Lom had previously used physical detail to define characters in serious dramatic films throughout his career, but the tick in Strikes Again became his most recognized piece of physical character work. It was one of the most effective pieces of character physicality in any comedy film of the decade, and it was something no director had asked him for. Detail 24. Burt Kwok found the Kato role increasingly hard to distinguish between films. Burt Kwok, who played Kato Fong across the series, once admitted in interviews that he found the films genuinely difficult to tell apart. To Kwok, they felt less like 5 separate productions and more like one continuous 12-hour film that happened to take 20 years to make. His reasoning was simple. Kato's function in every film was identical. He hides, he attacks, he gets thrown across a room, and Clouseau either fights back or ignores him. By the time of Strikes Again, Kwok was doing the same choreography for the 3rd consecutive film, in broadly the same apartment setting, with broadly the same outcome. That consistency, from the audience's point of view, made every Kato scene feel like a satisfying revisit to something already loved.
I mean, how generous of you, but...
Well, I'm not without influence, you know.
Yes, I know that.
Detail 23. The Clouseau-Dreyfus relationship was borrowed from a real comedic tradition. The dynamic between Sellers and Lom, the oblivious subordinate whose every action destroys his superior's sanity, has deep roots in the British music hall tradition and in the American comedy double-act format going back to Laurel and Hardy. Blake Edwards was conscious of this lineage. Stan Laurel's habit of cheerfully causing Oliver Hardy catastrophic harm without ever understanding what he had done maps almost exactly into Clouseau's effect on Dreyfus. In Strikes Again, Edwards pushed that dynamic to its logical extreme. Clouseau doesn't just irritate Dreyfus or cause inconvenience. He causes a full psychiatric collapse, an international criminal conspiracy, and the near destruction of the United Nations. The escalation from mild domestic comedy to world-threatening catastrophe is the film's central structural joke, and it rests entirely on the Laurel Hardy blueprint underneath it.
Why I ask you here?
Detail 22. The heist sequence. Under Clouseau's apartment was a parody of Riffraff. The sequence in which Dreyfus drills through the ceiling of the apartment below Clouseau's, tying up its occupants, working methodically upward while Clouseau and Cato battle above, was a direct parody of Jules Dassin's 1955 heist film, Rififi. In Rififi, one of the most celebrated heist sequences in cinema history, thieves spend the entire film meticulously drilling and cutting their way into a jewel store from the apartment above. Edwards took that image of calculated, patient precision from below and surrounded it with the absolute chaos happening above, creating the joke from the contrast between the two registers. The reference would have landed clearly for any cinephile in the audience in 1976.
Professor Fassbender.
Paris has a theory. They're sending over the top man, Chief Inspector Clouseau. He just sent this telegram arrived.
Detail 21, Leonard Rossiter and Colin Blakely. Both came from serious British theatre. The two Scotland Yard men assigned to shadow Clouseau in England, Quinlan, played by Leonard Rossiter, and Drummond, played by Colin Blakely, were both primarily stage actors with formidable theatrical reputations before their screen careers. Rossiter had appeared at the National Theatre and was in the middle of his run on the celebrated British sitcom Rising Damp at the time of filming. Blakely had worked extensively with the Royal Shakespeare Company and the National Theatre. Both were character actors of exceptional precision, capable of playing total bafflement in a completely naturalistic way. Their scenes with Sellers work because neither of them treats the material as comedy. They play every moment with earnest professional indignation, which makes Clouseau's destruction of everything around him even funnier.
For my numerous accomplishments, recognition was not forthcoming earlier.
Absolutely.
Detail 20, the inflatable hunchback costume, came from a real props department joke. The scene in which Clouseau disguises himself as a hunchback to gain access to the castle, only to overinflate his hunchback so badly that he floats off the ground and drifts through a window, grew out of a gag that reportedly started as a throwaway props department suggestion during pre-production. The original script called for a standard hunchback disguise. Someone on the props team suggested the costume be pneumatic. Edwards took the concept and built the payoff around the inflation going catastrophically wrong. The resulting visual, Clouseau slowly rising, completely unaware through a first-floor window, became one of the most purely Sellersian moments in any of the films. Detail 19, the Cato apartment fight was choreographed like a silent film sequence. The three-way apartment sequence, where Clouseau and Cato are simultaneously engaged in their routine surprise attack game while Dreyfus lurks below drilling through the ceiling, was choreographed by Blake Edwards with specific reference to the physical comedy style of Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd. Edwards had long admired the silent era's approach to constructing gags through physical space and timing rather than dialogue. The sequence uses the apartment's rooms, furniture, and levels as instruments of comedy in exactly the way Keaton used them in his own short films. The fact that three separate threats are converging in the same physical space, each unaware of the others, is pure silent era architecture applied to sound cinema.
3, that my hand is on fire.
Detail 18, the Fassbender house. Interrogation was built on Clouseau mispronouncing everything. A running joke throughout the Fassbender house interrogation scene, where Clouseau interviews the domestic staff, including a housekeeper, a gardener, and the cross-dressing butler Jarvis, is that Clouseau systematically mispronounces or misreads the name of every person he speaks to. The surname of the cook, Mrs. Leverlily, becomes something else entirely. The gardener, Mr. Shork, is addressed in an increasingly mangled form. This was not a single gag, but a sustained comic principle, Clouseau's accent is so catastrophically at odds with English names that he cannot successfully interview anyone, making his detective work literally impossible at the most basic level. Sellers played every mispronunciation with complete confidence, as though Clouseau believed his pronunciation was correct.
Morning, Doctor.
Detail 17. The Dreyfus Asylum opening was designed to make the audience sympathize with him first. Blake Edwards made a deliberate structural choice in opening the film with Dreyfus clearly on the mend. The audience is shown a man who has worked hard to recover, a man almost rational, almost returned to normal, whose psychiatrist genuinely believes he is ready to re-enter the world. Edwards wanted viewers to feel actual hope for Dreyfus before Clouseau arrived and destroyed it. That sympathy is what makes the subsequent collapse so funny and so oddly poignant. If Dreyfus had started the film already manic, the joke would have been simpler and the character less interesting. Starting him almost well gives the audience something to lose alongside him, which is a more sophisticated comic construction than the film is often credited for. Herbert Lom played those early scenes with real restraint, keeping the residual madness just visible beneath the surface of a man doing his best to keep it contained. When Clouseau walks through the door, you watch Lom's face change with remarkable precision.
Been very, very lucky, you know. Yes, and poor Kato will be in the hospital for weeks. Do you know what kind?
Detail 16. Andre Moran's Francois had appeared in every series entry Sellers made. Andre Moran, the French actor who played Sergeant Francois, Clouseau's loyal, long-suffering assistant at the Sûreté, appeared in every Pink Panther film in which Peter Sellers played the role, beginning with the original 1963 film. His character existed primarily to receive Clouseau's instructions, look puzzled, and confirm that the situation was as absurd as it appeared. Moran was a genuine French national who had originally come to Britain in the 1950s, and his authentic French delivery gave the Sûreté scenes a cultural credibility that Sellers' wildly exaggerated French accent deliberately undermined. The contrast was part of the joke every time they shared the screen. Detail 15. The stunt work in the film was among the most dangerous of any British production that year. Peter Sellers' heart condition meant that his stunt double Joe Dunn performed almost every physical sequence in the film, but the actual stunt work itself, catapult sequences, falls, fights, and the castle collapse, was legitimately hazardous by the production standards of British filmmaking in 1976. The castle drawbridge sequence required multiple takes of performers falling into and near working mechanisms. The catapult that launches Clouseau through the castle window was a practical device operated at speed. The production did not have access to the digital safety planning tools available to modern filmmakers. Several crew members sustained minor injuries during filming, and the castle backlot at Shepperton presented ongoing safety challenges that the production team had to manage in real time throughout the shoot. Detail 14. The film was the first in the series to function explicitly as a Bond parody. While earlier Pink Panther films had elements of spy movie pastiche, Strikes Again was the first to commit fully to the James Bond villain template. Dreyfus, with his castle headquarters, his kidnapped scientist, his doomsday device, his worldwide television broadcast, and his demand that the major powers eliminate a specific individual, is a direct parody of the Blofeld archetype. The film was made at the height of the Bond franchise's popularity, and Edwards was playing off audience familiarity with that formula as deliberately as Zaz would play off disaster movie conventions 4 years later with Airplane. The difference was that Edwards used one of his own characters as the villain rather than creating a new one.
We all agree, don't we, Mr. President, that we simply cannot afford to allow any other country to get hold of Fassbender's machine.
Detail 13. The film's tagline was one of the sharpest marketing lines of the year. The theatrical poster for the Pink Panther Strikes Again carried the tagline, "Why are the world's chief assassins after Inspector Clouseau? Why not? Everybody else is." It was a rare case of a marketing line that accurately reflected the film's tone and logic while also being independently funny. United Artists approved it relatively late in the campaign. In 1976, most studio comedies were marketed with either a broad premise description or a selection of review quotes. Using a tagline built like a Clouseau joke, a setup followed by a non-answer that was still somehow the correct answer, was an unusually clever piece of marketing for the era.
Of a whole city. I give you 7 days. 7 days.
Detail 12. The torture scene used a blackboard as the instrument of horror. When Dreyfus wants to break Professor Fassbender's will and force him to complete the doomsday device, the torture he employs is not physical violence. He has someone drag fingernails across a blackboard. The sound, conveyed through a closed door to Fassbender and to the audience, is treated with the full gravity of a genuine threat. It works as a comedic inversion of the spy thriller torture scene, precisely because the horror is completely real to everyone in the room, including the audience, for whom that sound provokes an instinctive, visceral response. The joke is that the sound genuinely is unbearable, which makes Dreyfus's choice of it as a weapon a piece of brilliant, absurdist logic.
Murder of the man in his bathtub.
What?
And I must warn you that anything you say will be taken down.
Detail 11. Blake Edwards based the film's structure loosely on the 3-act disaster movie format. Despite being a comedy, the film follows a structural rhythm borrowed from the disaster films it was in some ways spoofing. Act 1 establishes the threat and the characters. Act 2 escalates the danger through a series of increasingly large-scale incidents. Act 3 resolves everything through a spectacular physical climax in which the central location is destroyed. Edwards was aware of the structural parallel to films like Airport and The Towering Inferno and exploited it deliberately, using the audience's conditioning to expect escalating disaster to heighten the comedy of having Clouseau wander obliviously through each new catastrophe without noticing the scale of what he was causing. Detail 10. Peter Sellers was reportedly considering retiring from the Clouseau role after this film. During and after production, Sellers made comments to various interviewers suggesting he felt he had taken the Clouseau character as far as he could go creatively. Blake Edwards reportedly said similar things about the series at around the same time. Both men stated publicly that Strikes Again might be their last collaboration on the franchise. Within 2 months, Revenge of the Pink Panther was in development, contradicting those statements entirely. What the episode does indicate is that by 1976, the relationship between the two men, and between both of them and the material, had reached a point of genuine uncertainty about where the character had left to go.
Let's dig it.
Detail 9. The hotel dog scene was entirely unscripted in its final form. The sequence in which Clouseau bends down to pet the hotel desk clerk's dog, asking, "Does your dog bite?" and being told no, only for the dog to savage him, before the clerk clarifies that the dog in question is not, in fact, his dog, was one of the most immediately beloved moments in the film. The gag existed in the script, but the specific timing, the pauses, and Sellers' physical reaction were developed almost entirely during rehearsal and on the day of filming. Sellers found the rhythm of the scene through repetition and adjusted it until the pause between the bite and the revelation hit at exactly the right interval. It was, according to the cast and crew, one of the fastest a gag had ever been perfected during the making of the series, and it was simple enough that it has been quoted and referenced in comedy ever since.
Police Academy. The parallel bars, my specialty. I was something of an astronomy.
Detail 8, the parallel bars. Gag came out of nowhere by design. During the apartment fight sequence, Clouseau is suddenly launched into the air over a gymnastics parallel bar that appears from nowhere in the apartment, arcing over it, landing, and continuing as if nothing has happened. The bar has no explanation in the script, no setup, and no acknowledged existence in the film's world. Its presence was a deliberate application of pure surrealist logic. In the world of Clouseau's apartment, a gymnastics bar can simply exist, and no one will remark on it. Edwards took the principle from silent era comedy, the idea that any prop is justified if the laugh it produces is large enough, and deployed it in a film that was otherwise relatively grounded in its physical reality. The absence of explanation is the entire joke. Detail 7. The film was shot across 4 countries in 5 months. The production was genuinely international in its locations. Principal photography took place in Paris, France, Bavaria, Germany, County Meath in Ireland, and at Shepperton Studios in Surrey, England. The Oktoberfest sequences were filmed on location in the Munich area, giving those scenes an authenticity that matched the visual comedy of dozens of assassins converging on a genuine mass public event. The Irish location, Navan in County Meath, provided the asylum exterior. Shepperton provided the castle interiors and the backlot exterior. The speed of the production, combined with the number of countries involved, placed significant logistical pressure on a crew already managing a cast and director relationship that had significantly deteriorated.
The Fassbender butler, and tonight you are...
Inspector, before you get yourself all unglued.
Madame or monsieur?
Detail 6. The Clouseau disguises escalated in ambition compared to earlier films. In earlier series entries, Clouseau's disguises were typically crude. A fake beard, a changed hat, an unconvincing accent layered on top of his existing unconvincing accent. In Strikes Again, Edwards pushed the disguise set pieces considerably further. The hunchback costume that inflates and floats. The elderly German dentist, complete with full prosthetics and a new vocal register for Sellers. The stagehand costume Clouseau uses to infiltrate the castle grounds. Each disguise is more elaborate than anything in the previous 4 films, and each fails in a more spectacular manner. This escalation was deliberate. By 1976, audiences expected the disguises, so the film had to raise the stakes on how badly they would go wrong.
What's that?
That is the anesthetic, you know.
Oh, good.
Detail 5. The film was both Sellers and Edwards' biggest box office success in the series. Despite the tension on set and the compromised production conditions, the Pink Panther Strikes Again outperformed every previous entry in the franchise at the box office. Against a production budget of approximately $6 million, it grossed around $75 million worldwide. The The return of the Pink Panther had also been a major commercial success the previous year, but Strikes Again topped it. For United Artists, the franchise had become one of its most reliable revenue generators at a time when the studio was also releasing Rocky and other major productions. For Sellers and Edwards, the financial success made it commercially impossible to walk away, regardless of what either man said in interviews about retirement from the role. Money makes sequels. Strikes Again proved that principle completely, and within months, both men were back in pre-production on Revenge of the Pink Panther.
In comparison, the Cosa Nostra will seem like the Vienna Boys Choir. Here is the list. But how?
Detail 4. The film never explains how Dreyfuss keeps his job after his previous crimes. In A Shot in the Dark, the second Pink Panther film from 1964, Dreyfuss had committed multiple murders in a crazed attempt to eliminate Clouseau. By the time of the return of the Pink Panther, he was back in his position as chief inspector with no acknowledgement of the murders. By Strikes Again, he has been in an asylum, escaped, destroyed the United Nations building, built and deployed a doomsday device, and attempted to hold multiple world governments hostage. Despite this, the next film in the series, Revenge of the Pink Panther, shows him back at his desk as though nothing has happened. The franchise's cheerful indifference to continuity on this point was never addressed, never explained, and never needed to be. The audience simply accepted it, which says something about how much goodwill the character had generated. Detail 3. The film was widely compared to a James Bond story with the wrong protagonist. Contemporary critics in 1976 pointed out repeatedly that the plot of Strikes Again, mad villain, kidnapped scientist, doomsday device, world held hostage, international assassins deployed, was structurally identical to the plot of a Bond film. The specific elements matched Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, and The Spy Who Loved Me, closely enough that the comparison was unavoidable. The joke was that the world's intelligence apparatus, which in a Bond film would deploy its most capable agent to resolve the crisis, responded here by sending Clouseau, and that Clouseau, through catastrophic incompetence rather than skill, achieved the same outcome. The film is, among other things, a commentary on what spy thrillers would look like if competence were removed from the equation entirely.
Devil indeed. Come, sit down. Let us just say for the moment that I'm your host, and that I will do everything in my power to make you...
Detail 2. Both Sellers and Edwards admitted the film might have benefited from more time. In later interviews, both Peter Sellers and Blake Edwards acknowledged that the speed of production, rushed into being within 18 months of the return of the Pink Panther, largely for commercial reasons, had cost the film some of its potential. Sellers felt that certain scenes had been resolved before the best version of them had been found. Edwards felt that some of the physical set pieces could have been refined further with more rehearsal time. Neither believed it was a poor film, and both acknowledged its commercial success. But the awareness that pressure of production had truncated the creative process was something both men carried away from the shoot, and it contributed to the complicated feelings each of them had about the finished picture. Detail 1. The film effectively ended the version of the series that had made it famous. The Pink Panther Strikes Again was the last film in which the Clouseau-Dreyfuss dynamic functioned at full power with both Sellers and Lhomme in peak form. Revenge of the Pink Panther, released in 1978, was a more mechanical production that both men later spoke about with less affection. Sellers died in July 1980 at the age of 54, and the two post-Sellers films, Trail of the Pink Panther and Curse of the Pink Panther, were assembled from leftover footage or built around a replacement character. The specific chemistry between Sellers' oblivious genius and Lam's unraveling authority, the engine of the franchise from A Shot in the Dark onward, existed for the final time in Strikes Again at the level it had always operated. No one knew it then, and the film was made under some of the most difficult conditions of any entry in the series. But audiences watching it for the first time in December 1976 were, without knowing it, watching the best version of what these two remarkable performers could do together for essentially the last time. If you made it all the way to detail 1, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There is a lot more where this came from.